All right. Welcome, everybody, to this week's Rising Tide Foundation presentation. And I'm very happy that we're continuing the theme of the American system. What is this thing of the American system that most Americans, let alone Canadians or Europeans or anyone else listening to this, probably haven't heard about if you're only relying on the education system that you experienced growing up? And that's not a coincidence because despite it being the most powerful science and art that has yet been developed as far as a science of human happiness and social organization, premised entirely around the power of natural law embedded in human creative reason, despite that fact, and despite the fact that its development has allowed us to not just overcome so many limits to growth, but really provide creative miracles that allowed humanity to win greater degrees of freedom and to overcome the immense power of oligarchical systems for centuries. Despite all of that, it's been obscured beyond belief. And it's somewhat interesting, it's extremely interesting right now that we were seeing a revival of it in varying degrees in Eurasia. We've been seeing this in recent years, very ironically, considering many of those Eurasian powers that are representing this tradition are in the popular minds of most Americans and Canadians, the most anti-American thing in the world. But in fact, ironically, they are representing that tradition. But also, we see it in a cloudy, confused form being revived around the figure of Donald Trump. And there's many problems with its expression, but it is a real thing. So Kyle, who some people might know already because Kyle is a brilliant member of a brilliant family, of the Holmes family, has been plunging into this question of what is this American system, and specifically its expression around the figure of Abraham Lincoln. And he agreed to develop and share some of his discoveries along the way. So without further ado, I'm going to leave the stage to Kyle Beaudoin, and afterwards, like usual, for those who have any questions, put your name in the queue in the chat box or raise your digital hand. We'll call upon you. And otherwise, the stage is yours, Kyle.
All right. Thanks, Matthew, for the kind introduction. Just share my screen here real quick. Okay. So thanks everybody for coming. And thanks again, Matthew, for issuing me this challenge and giving me the opportunity to dive a little deeper and actually learn some really cool stuff. I found the American Civil War a really interesting topic. So I'm excited to get into it. Um, so Lincoln's fight to revive the American system. So first thing, little preamble, like why should we care about the American system? You know, you look around today, the US hasn't exactly been on its best behavior. And there are a lot of people that would have you believe that our current version of the American system is what it always has been. And it's the true nature of what America was always intended to be. You see your worldwide CIA interference, government overthrows, color revolutions, endless wars. I don't need to go on there. Um, but this is a distortion. This wasn't America's destiny and not upon its founding. Many men gave their entire lives to the cause of keeping alive the spirit of what made 1776 possible. So I couldn't think of a better way to start it than with a slightly shortened version of this quote from Henry C. Carey, which I think I've seen Matthew use across his works more than any other quote that I've come across. So, two systems are before the world. One looks to pauperism, ignorance, depopulation, barbarism. Oh, sorry, hold on, my thing. There we go. Sorry, I just have I have to hide the camera. It's hiding my slide. There we go. Sorry, I'll just start over. Two systems are before the world. One looks to pauperism, ignorance, depopulation, and barbarism. The other to increasing wealth, comfort, intelligence, combination of action, and civilization. One looks towards universal war, the other towards universal peace. One is the English system, the other we may be proud to call the American system, for it is the only one ever devised, the tendency of which was that of elevating while equalizing the condition of man throughout the world. It's Henry C. Carey, who we'll get into a little bit later. Um, talking about open versus closed systems, like Matthew has talked about in a lot of his work, win-win cooperation in the spirit of limitless growth and ever-growing self-perfectibility, belief in potential. versus might makes right, power, and control, rooted in ideas of scarcity, unipolarity, and limits to growth, ideas of stasis, death, all for one and more for me types of individuals. And today is a lot of revisionist history and denouncement of the American system from its very roots, claims that its very founding was built upon racist ideas. Today's discourse is a really skewed interpretation at best and outright malicious at worst. For example, you'll take people who criticize America as inherently hypocritical for rebelling against the British Empire and trying to uphold this new standard of independence and freedom from an oppressive empirical system, while simultaneously upholding a system of slavery and oppression. So, people like to treat it like it was destined to be this way from the very beginning, but it's not the case. They cite people like George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, pointing out the fact that they did, in fact, have slaves as founding fathers, but they neglect the fact that Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and many other of the founding fathers were often opponents to slavery. And even people like Washington and Jefferson in their later life would admit that they kind of abhorred the practice of slavery and in many regards regretted the practice in the first place. And by 1792, there was actually quite a bit of traction in several states displaying a tendency towards abolition. You had Vermont, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut that were all drafting legal moves to start phasing out slavery. But through efforts of British loyalists like Aaron Burr, Timothy Pickering, Colonel James Wilkinson, George Cabot, and Albert Gallatin, they spent a lot of time working very hard to propagandize the American people into believing that the free states and slave states couldn't coexist. There could be no solution, and that the only way to go forward would be to dissolve the Union and break it apart. But I think the American Constitution and the Declaration of Independence speak for itself in regards to these claims. I don't see anything to suggest that it's attempting to uphold an inherently oppressive system. Let's read this real quick. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Looks like they forgot about the part of will to power and domination over there. So I want to paint a picture of what kind of situation Lincoln found himself fighting up against. It was quite a dire set of circumstances, and it was a lot of hard work to fight through it. So, before Lincoln even took office, the U.S. economy was in pretty dire straits. You had in 1836 Andrew Jackson crushing the Second National Bank of the U.S. By refusing to renew the charter of the National Bank, removing federal deposits, effectively bankrupting them, causing it to collapse. Further, in 1846, the federal government was separating its funds from private banks, devaluing credit and deregulating them, leading to complete financial currency chaos, where you had between 7,000 and 10,000 recognized banknotes all circulating, with 14 to 1,600 state banks at any given time, each issuing multiple of its own unstable currencies. And when Lincoln was elected, the U.S. was still trying to bounce back from the 1857 financial panic caused by overspeculation and declining European demand for American goods, as well as multiple bank collapses. And the previous administration, just before Lincoln got elected, had managed to get the U.S. national debt up to $75 million. But that's not all. Obviously everybody knows there was a civil war. 1861, the South secedes, taking with it 11 states into open rebellion, and 25% approximately of all U.S. economic activity, as well as 40% of the U.S.'s agricultural output. And Lincoln had enemies everywhere. You had Confederate spies in Washington, D.C., sabotaging the Union war effort and political maneuvers at every corner. You had the Copperhead Northern Democrats who were opposed to the war, constantly trying to undermine Lincoln's policies and trying to broker backdoor peace deals for the Confederacy to win their own independence from the North, dissolving the Union, granting them legitimacy. And you even had some reluctant Union generals who failed to aggressively pursue Confederate armies early on in the war, which prolonged certain endeavors. And espionage was everywhere, delivering intel to London and to the South and the Confederacy, both political and military. And as tends to be the case in grand events like these, especially in wars, you see the hand of the British hard at work, even though officially on the books they didn't openly support the Confederacy, but I think their actions speak much louder than their words. Because at the end of the day, they were very much in favor of the dissolution of the Union, having two smaller, weaker states that they could economically take over and subjugate while they were too busy hating each other and fighting themselves. So, the British played a big role in propping up the Southern Confederacy. They wouldn't have been able to withhold for nearly as long as they did. Not to say that the South wasn't a threat. They had good generals, and their win conditions for the war were easier to achieve compared to that of the North. It's a lot easier to defend hard to traverse terrain and exhaust your enemy than it is to storm that territory and wipe out your enemy wholesale. And the British had massive economic ties to the South already going into the war. 75 to 80% of Britain's cotton was coming from the South. And when the Union set up trade blockades to stop the South from managing to export their cotton and economically keep themselves going throughout the war, the British operated with Confederate agents to initiate blockade running to smuggle the cotton in trade for supplies, luxury items, capital, and weapons, supplying the South. And even their weaponry, a lot of armament were British manufactured. Low estimates are around 30% of the South's weapons, ammunition, small arms, artillery, gunpowder, even military uniforms and medical supplies were manufactured and supplied by the British. And it gets better. Even around 75% of the warships that were in the Confederate fleet were built and supplied by British shipyards. Used to disrupt commerce and trade of Union shipping. They weren't strong enough to break the Union blockade or even, combat them in a frontline head-on fight on their navy. But they still did a lot of damage, disrupting commerce. For example, the CSS Alabama managed to sink or capture around 60 Union merchant vessels over the course of the war. And those blockade runners, those fast steamships that they used to bypass Union blockades, were also often built and supplied by British manufacturing. And you might be asking yourself, how could they afford this? The British Empire isn't known to give away their support freely. So British banks were issuing many loans and lines of credit to the South, allowing them to use their cotton for collateral, which I find somewhat ironic. In 1834, the British abolished slavery in their own borders, but they're perfectly willing to prop up slavery to meet their own ends all over the world. Anyways, these loans had really high interest rates too, which also shows, even as the Confederate South is concerned, the British Empire doesn't really have friends, they have interests. You also had British investors buying up high-risk Confederate bonds. Around 60% of all bonds issued by the Confederacy were purchased by British investors, approximately $9 million worth, which would be around $261 million USD today. And it doesn't end there. There was a dangerous plot for a Northern Confederacy, Canada not yet pretending to have independence like it does today, was an overt extension of the British Empire. During the war, Canada was basically a safe haven for Confederate agents, spies, and operatives. It was also a recruiting ground for soldiers and fundraisers, and was executed as a launching point for raids on northern states, sort of terrorist operations, robbing banks, attacking towns. They also had smuggling routes set up all up through Canada to divert supplies through and support the Confederacy. And even at a certain point, there was plans for attacks coordinating with British and French to formally declare support for the Confederacy, which luckily was subverted thanks to Tsar Alexander in Russia. Uh, some people, probably not anybody watching this live, but a lot of people in modern discourse think, why the hell would Russia care what happens in the United States, right? As long as most people can remember, Russia and the United States have always been at each other's throats and maneuvering for one another's destruction. But not so. Ever since 1776 and for quite a while onward, Russia actually had quite a positive relationship with the United States. Abraham Lincoln and Tsar Alexander II had some pretty solid diplomatic ties. They often exchanged letters, mutually extending goodwill and respect. So much so that after Lincoln's death, Tsar Alexander sent condolences for the sacrifice and loss of such a great leader. And they were of a similar mind on the emancipation of enslaved or serfdom people. So they were natural allies, only separated by 2 years for their own individual emancipation movements. And Russia was no friend to Britain at the time. Russia had already suffered at the hand of the British Empire, having experienced the Crimean War only 5 years prior. So they were no stranger to Europe's interventionism. And supporting the Union was a way for Russia to push back against Britain and maintain the most successful system that had ever dared defy the British Empire. A little quote here at the bottom from Tsar Alexander II talking to a journalist after the fact as to why he offered the support that he did, saying, "All this I did of love for my own dear Russia, rather than love for the American Republic. I acted thus because I understood that Russia would have a more serious task to perform if the American Republic, with advanced industrial development, were broken up and Great Britain should be left in control of most branches of modern industrial development." So that's kind of the picture of what Lincoln found himself running up against. I have this little section here that I pulled directly from Matthew's book just to really quickly demonstrate what Russia actually did to interfere and support the Union. Direct military intervention thwarted. As early as 1861, the Trent crisis nearly induced a hot war with Britain when a Union ship intervened onto a British ship in international waters and arrested two high-level Confederate agents en route to London. Knowing that a twofold war at this early stage was unwinnable, Lincoln pushed back against hotheads within his own cabinet, who argued for a second front, saying, "One war at a time." Despite this near miss, London wasted no time deploying over 10,000 soldiers to Canada for the duration of the war, ready to strike down upon the Union at a moment's notice, and kept at bay in large measure due to the bold intervention of the Russian fleet to both Atlantic and Pacific coasts of the USA. This was a clear message to both England and to Napoleon III's France, who were stationed across the Mexican border, to stay out of America's war. So let's circle back to right around the time Lincoln gets elected. Just before, you have Wall Street moving to bankrupt the US even further. British loyalists are really concerned at this time over Lincoln's election, afraid that if he does get elected, that all of the industrial organization and reliance that they have on the slavery would be at risk. And so they attempted a credit boycott, restricting loans and hoarding gold, preventing the US from paying its debts. And so they had to seek an $150 million loan in gold, which ended up getting suspended on December 28th, 1861. Initiating a payment crisis, effectively removing the US from the gold standard. And then in January of 1862, after all of this, New York banks coordinating with London offer Lincoln an out, an ultimatum, so to speak, where they could pay for the war effort through a massive increase in direct taxation of the population, deposit all US government gold into New York private banks and make those banks the sole agent for the marketing of US government debt. The bonds would primarily be sold in London. Deregulate the banks by suspending the sub-treasury laws, and withdraw all government issued paper currency so that only gold and private banknotes could circulate as currency. And if the US took this out, they would effectively economically surrender to the British Empire, and it's unlikely that the Union would have managed to do much after that. And 1776 would effectively be undone. But if they refused, since it was an ultimatum, the bankers would intentionally sow chaos and destroy the Union from within financially. And once again, the war would be lost. So a bit of a rock and a hard place. So what does Lincoln do? Well, he creates for himself and for America a third choice. He institutes the Legal Tender Act of 1862, issuing $150 million in paper currency, which would later expand to $450 million in just 1 year. They also issued 520 bonds, which would be redeemable in gold, which would mature after 5 years, which would all be sold to the American public rather than overseas to private London banks. And the greenbacks would start circulating as legal tender, able to be used for almost all debts and taxes, as well as for daily spending and business investments. It wasn't perfect, though. Shortly after, the Senate would sabotage the bill, amending the act so that the greenbacks couldn't be used to pay interest on the bonds or the notes. They would have to be paid for in coin, in gold. Thaddeus Stevens, one of Lincoln's greatest allies in emancipation and economics throughout his presidency, had this to say about the Senate's amendment. They fell upon the bill in hot haste, and so disfigured and deformed it that its very father would not know it. Instead of being a beneficent and invigorating measure, it is now positively mischievous. It has all the bad qualities which its enemies charged on the original bill, and none of its benefits. It now creates money, one for the banks and brokers, and another for the people. It discriminates between the rights of different classes of creditors, allowing the rich capitalists to demand gold and compelling the ordinary lender of money on individual security to receive notes which the government had purposefully discredited. Nevertheless, Americans embraced the greenbacks, investing heavily into their farming industry businesses and paying what debts they could to make the progress that they could. And this was really a launching point for what we end up getting to call Lincoln's economic revolution, where he releases a rapid fire series of economic reforms to uplift America out of the economic squalor that it had found itself in, starting with the Morrill Tariff, March 2nd, April 1862, introducing a tariff raising import taxes of foreign goods on the average rate of around 26 to 36% to encourage domestic production, shielding northern industries from European competition, and providing revenue for the Union war effort and lessen U.S. borrowing. And it was a good strategy because it was very beneficial to the North, but harmed the South, as the South was heavily dependent on European imports in exchange for exporting all their cotton. You also have the Revenue Act of 1862, creating the first progressive income tax in U.S. history, $600 being taxed at 3%, $10,000 at 5%. It also authorized the creation of the IRS and raised taxes on luxury goods, alcohol, tobacco, and corporate profits. This is the only one that I have mixed feelings about. I'm sure many people can sympathize with not being the biggest fans of the IRS today and the way that whole system works. But in my household, we like to look at the intentions of individuals and how their intentions shaped history and ask the further question, what shaped their intentions? And what shapes their intentions is the type of attention that they're paying to the world around them. That's what shapes their intentions. Moving on, probably my favorite act in the Lincoln's economic revolution is the Homestead Act on May 20th, 1862, which provided 270 million acres of federal land where each individual age 21 and over could redeem up to 160 acres for themselves. And they could actually eventually own the land completely on their own. All they had to do was build a home on it, cultivate crops, and start working the land for a period of 5 years. And after 5 years, they could spend a small fee to the government of $10 to $12, which is around $315 to $378 today, to purchase the land outright without any lifelong debts or any of the such. And this was really good. You had heavy incentives through this for westward expansion for Americans to go out and settle the American frontier. Like I said earlier, when the South seceded, they took with them around 40% of America's agricultural production. And so this was a big, much needed boost to Union agricultural production. It was a good opportunity for the poor to break free from the traditional elite land ownership system. Now, some small farmer or, lower class individual had at least the opportunity to own land and start a really productive life rather than have to be some Wall Street business mogul. And had a very good cultural influence, the types of people that would succeed promoting meritocracy, industriousness, and conscientiousness, and rewarding the loyalty of anybody that stayed loyal to the Union, because you could only redeem this land if you hadn't taken up arms against the U.S. and joined the rebel states. Going hand in hand quite well with the Homestead Act, we have the Pacific Railway Act from July 1st, 1862, which was the first railroad being authorized to connect the east and the west coasts, which created rapid growth in cities and towns along the entire length of the railway. It created a national market by connecting agricultural and industrial centers. And being as large of an industrial project as it was, it provided a massive ripple effect, boosting many existing industries like steel, coal, lumber, and manufacturing. Nothing seems to grind the oligarchy's gears like big infrastructure developments, especially rail. Think the Belt and Road Initiative today really gets them up in arms. And then we have the National Banking Acts of 1863 and 1864, which allowed banks to receive federal charters rather than individual states chartering them. And it established a uniform national currency, replacing that chaotic system of thousands of individual banknotes that were unstable. And it regulated the banks, forcing them to hold reserves and maintain minimum capital requirements, as well as to hold U.S. government bonds as security. And it was later amended to place a 10% tax on the private banknotes from before, forcing them out of circulation and effectively putting them on the national system. And then moving out of the economic revolution, economic policies, we have Lincoln's fight for emancipation. He does the Emancipation Proclamation, January 1st, 1863, declaring freedom for all enslaved people in the rebel states, which he got a lot of pushback for. You had extremist abolitionists, which people like Frederick Douglass used to be alongside. Frederick Douglass would go on to carve his own path with his own newspaper after his time spent with the abolitionists, but they shared the criticism of the Emancipation Proclamation that it didn't go far enough. There were still some northern states practicing slavery, and this declaration only declared that the rebel states would have to give up slavery at this time. But in my view, it was largely a strategic move. Lincoln needed time to garner more support, and if he had been more aggressive with his Emancipation Proclamation, he may well have lost support early on that he wouldn't have been able to get later. For example, when the 13th Amendment would get voted on just 2 years later, they needed 2/3 in the majority to vote it in, which needed 117 votes. And the final tally was 119 in favor, 56 against. So it only passed by 2 votes. And that was 2 years after he had to buy time and do some backdoor politicking, bribing some officials here and there, offering positions and whatnot. But that's just a little bit of how that backdoor politicking game works, even for a good cause. He also received a lot of criticisms from Copperheads, these Northern Democrats, who accused Lincoln of prolonging the war past justification, which held some truth because they were, remember, trying to broker those backdoor peace talks and offer concessions to the South, which would essentially, if the war was won without a total Union victory, it would grant legitimacy to the South. It would allow the British Empire to openly support the South, and a whole slew of bad stuff uh, gone there. And you might have lost the greatest opportunity thus far to completely do away with slavery in the United States for who knows how long, for somebody to come along and do that thing. Um, he got criticized. Lincoln got criticized quite a bit for in later years and with revisionist historians that he didn't really care about slavery that much. He only wanted to save the Union, and at best, slavery was just a means to an end to achieve that goal. But I want to tie in Frederick Douglass because he has a really unique perspective. Matthew has a fantastic chapter on Frederick Douglass in Clash of the Two Americas, Volume 1, where he goes deeper than I'm about to go here. So I highly recommend you go read that. But I think Douglass has some important contributions to kind of demonstrate Lincoln's actual belief and conviction as far as it came to slavery and saving the
Just
Union.
just super quick before you go into that, that particular
Yep.
chapter was written by Cynthia as well. So just put that on the
Oh,
record so I
okay.
don't take credit for
Perfect.
that idea.
Well, well done, Cynthia. My statement stands. It's a fantastic chapter. Read it. So, little context on Frederick Douglass. He was born directly into slavery on February 18th, 1817. His mother was one of the only slaves in the region, if not the only, who could read. So she got to work early, getting a good head on her son's shoulders. By age 9, Frederick Douglass was already thinking about escaping and had a keen eye towards education. And he got lucky. He managed to befriend the daughter of his slave owner, who, when he turned 10, sent him to live in Baltimore with her husband, where he managed to learn to read. Uh, Fast forward 5 years, a little bit more bad luck. He gets sent back to the plantation due to some family politics stuff. But 5 years away left him not in physical shape to work the hard labor, nor intellectual shape to be as obedient as his master would have liked him to be. So they sent him to the Negro Breaker, where he spent around a year getting whipped and beaten sunrise to sunset. And when that wasn't happening, they were working him in the field to the point of limit, trying to break him entirely. But he didn't break. At age 20, he escapes from slavery, disguising himself as a free black sailor, and escapes elsewhere, finding himself in company of some supportive abolitionists who give him a safe place and end up recruiting him to the abolitionist cause for a time. Um, and while he's there, he starts to realize that uh, though in many cases well-meaning, a lot of these abolitionists are more radical than he is. They don't believe in the Union. They've bought into this Aaron Burr propaganda years later that the only solution is to dissolve the Union, that the slave states and free states cannot coexist. So he distances himself from the movement, rejecting those views of the Union, recognizing that America isn't pro-slavery in character down to the very foundation. And he creates his own newspaper called the North Star, where he took the opportunity on his own to investigate these ideas and actually decide for himself as his own thinking person, investigating these ideas. And this quote here is a reflection upon that. He said, "My new circumstances compelled me to rethink the whole subject, and to study with some care not only the just and proper rules of legal interpretation, but the origin, design, nature, rights, powers, and duties of civil governments, and also the relations which human beings sustain to it. By such a course of thought and reading, I was conducted to the conclusion that the Constitution of the United States, inaugurated to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty, could not well have been designed at the same time to maintain and perpetuate a system of rapine and murder like slavery, especially as was not one word can be found in the Constitution to authorize such a belief. The Constitution of our country is our warrant for the abolition of slavery in every state of the Union." And through this and the creation of his newspaper, He becomes one of the most influential voices in advocating to recruit black soldiers to the Union Army, bolstering their numbers and helping the war effort like that, which would eventually lead to him meeting and befriending Lincoln. They have their disagreements from time to time, but overall, he develops a very positive impression of Abraham Lincoln. And fast forward just after the Emancipation Proclamation, Douglas and Lincoln would meet one more time before Lincoln would eventually be assassinated, which Douglas reflects upon here. I'd like to use it just to demonstrate what I meant at the beginning of the Douglas section of his perspective, sort of ratifying the true character of Lincoln's conviction in regards to slavery and saving the Union. The main subject on which he wished to confer with me was as to the means most desirable to be employed outside the army to induce the slaves in the rebel states to come within the deferral lines, the increasing opposition to the war in the North, and the mad cry against it, because it was being made an abolition war, alarmed Mr. Lincoln, and made him apprehensive that a peace might be forced upon him, which would leave still in slavery all who had not come within our lines. What he wanted was to make his proclamation as effective as possible in the event of such a peace. He said he was being accused of protracting the war beyond its legitimate object and failing to make peace when he might have done so to advantage. He was afraid of what might come of all these complaints, but was persuaded that no solid and lasting peace could come short of an absolute submission on the part of the rebels. He saw the danger of premature peace. I was the more impressed by this benevolent consideration because he before said in answer to peace clamor that his object was to save the Union and to do so with or without slavery. What he said on this day showed a deeper moral conviction against slavery than I had ever seen before in anything spoken or written by him. And Cynthia ends this chapter in The Clash of the Two Americas, Volume 1, with an amazing little anecdote from near the end of Douglas's life after the war, after Lincoln's assassination, and I just couldn't not include it. It's too good, and really effectively shows off how strong his moral character is. So again, after the war ends and after Lincoln's dead, Frederick Douglass decides to go and meet with his old slaveholder while he's on his deathbed. And so this quote is him reflecting upon the conversation that he would have. But now that slavery was destroyed and the slave state and master stood upon equal ground, I was not only willing to meet him, but was very glad to do so. He was to me no longer a slaveholder, either in fact or in spirit, and I regarded him as I did myself, a victim of the circumstances of birth, education, law, and custom. Our courses had been determined for us, not by us. We had both been flung by powers that did not ask our consent upon a mighty current of life which we could neither resist nor control. By this current, he was a master and I a slave. But now our lives, verging towards a point where differences disappear, where even the constancy of hate breaks down, and where the clouds of pride, passion, and selfishness vanish before the brightness of infinite light. Just amazing, really powerful stuff. I can't even begin to imagine the kind of internal strength that it would take to forgive and move past such abuses that relationship had going on for it. So moving forward again, we have The Empire Strikes Back, a really interesting and important year, 1865. You have January 31st, 1865. You have the 13th Amendment passing, once again, by only 2 votes, legally abolishing slavery across the board. March 4th, 1865, Lincoln's second inauguration, he wins in a complete landslide with 212 electoral votes and only 21 votes for his opposition. He had an absolute mandate and love of the people to go again, so things were looking good. And then April 9th, 1865, General Robert E. Lee, the commander of the Confederate Army, surrenders, and the war is effectively won. There would still be the Confederate cells around the South and up in Canada that would still resist, but the largest organizational power in the Confederacy had just surrendered, so it was effectively over. But we get to the sad part of the year, April 14th, 1865. President Abraham Lincoln, just 41 days after his second inauguration, is shot in the back of the head by John Wilkes Booth attending a play at Ford's Theater. Booth, coordinating with Confederates up in Canada and British agents, launched and successfully carried out Lincoln's assassination. But not all was lost, as is often the case with great men of time. Their fight outlives them, and Lincoln's no exception. We come to Henry C. Carey, one of the most influential economists of his time from 1850 to 1879. He was pretty much the most predominant one. And he was a key advisor to Abraham Lincoln throughout the entire presidency. Little context for Carey. His father was Matthew Carey, who was a student and protege of Benjamin Franklin, receiving his support, establishing a printing business, and managed to become a leading publisher in Philadelphia, where he produced books, newspapers, and political pamphlets, spreading ideas of protectionism, economic nationalism, infrastructure development, and national unity. And the Carey family as a whole played a really strong role in shaping economic policy well into the 19th century. Henry Carey himself was a student of Hamiltonian economics, and as well as his own father's influence, of course. And he became a massive influence on Lincoln as well mostly his economic policy, instilling in him protectionism, national banking, and infrastructure development as key pillars of Lincoln's economic revolution. That's too far. There we go. So he was a bit of a firebrand. He was sort of a one-man army. After Lincoln's death, the burden of upholding Lincoln's economic revolution fell pretty much entirely on his shoulders for the next 14 years. He would have to almost single-handedly take charge and hold up the fight for Lincoln's policies. Because pretty quick after Lincoln's death, the wolves started knocking on the door to undo all that he had put forth. And Henry Carey would do this straight until his death at the age of 85. Like I said, Lincoln's body was barely in the ground when British run and funded publishers like the North American Review and Chicago Tribune would start publishing calls to drastically contract the currency, returning to the monopolized British gold standard. A little side note, I know a lot of people today, especially in the freedom movement, look at a gold-backed currency as a really good thing, but at this time, it's pretty dangerous considering, at least as far as the U.S. is concerned, the British have a large monopoly on much of the gold, making it very dangerous for the U.S. to be reliant on the British gold standard at the time. At the same time, they were also calling for ends to these protective tariffs from the Morrill Tariff. And in December of 1865, Treasury Secretary Hugh McCulloch demands blanket authority to begin withdrawing all of the greenbacks from circulation, which was voted 144 to 6 in favor directly after in the 1866 Compromise Loan Act. And so Henry Carey rallied his allies and he started writing open letters, over 1,000 pages of writings and letters that would go out and be published in 60% of American newspapers. Sorry, I got ahead of myself a little earlier. That Compromise Loan Act, 1866, the Compromise Loan Act, as a result of Carey's open letters, would be passed, which was a limitation on the original Contraction Act, limiting the withdrawal of the greenbacks down to 10 million in the first 6 months, and then 4 million per month after, which is radically below what Hugh McCulloch had initially intended. And then I have this slide, which is it's fairly long, but it's a really great example of the kinds of things that Henry Carey would write in these open letters, and really demonstrates how influential he was able to be and his understanding of the fight that they had in front of him. So I'm going to read it. The most powerful, most dangerous, and most unpopular of free traders had the offer of the treasury. Most narrowly, as we are assured, did the nation escape the injury that must have resulted from being represented at Vienna by the president of the British Free Trade League. Almost without exception, our chief representatives in Europe are free traders. Our consuls and consuls general belong mainly, as I believe, to that school which teaches that the smuggler is the great reformer of the age, the last of all qualities now demanded in men who are to represent the country abroad is that of being in policy truly governed. Oh, sorry, I lost my spot. Uh, that being in policy truly and distinctively American disciples in that school in which Hamilton and Clay were teachers. For half a century, the South governed us, and the end of that government was found in a rebellion. Avoiding Sitha, we have fallen on Charybdis, the money monopoly of the extreme north, working almost as much mischief as before had done the slavery of the South. Let the treasury now terminate its alliance with the money-lending aristocracy. Let it look a little kindly on the money-borrowing democracy. Let it seek to unite itself with the real Congress, and it can then have any intelligent legislation for which it may see fit to ask. Let it fail to do these things, and the downfall of the party will come as certainly as darkness follows, the setting of the sun. It came into power as advocate of the rights of the laboring many, black and white, northern and southern. It loses power as it becomes more and more the ally of the few by whom the many are governed. These latter feeling that the whip of the moneylender and the lash of the slave driver are close kindred with each other. Britain makes answer by buying up our journals and by scattering well-paid lecturers throughout the country, many of them professing to be Republicans, but all mainly engaged in making free trade votes. British gold is thus undermining the administration whose members wait, as it seems to me, with folded arms. The arrival of the time when they shall find themselves compelled to cry, "Too late, too late." Moving in one direction, we shall dictate law, thus securing to ourselves a permanent place as the great power of the earth. Traveling in the other, we shall find ourselves compelled to accept as law the decision of Britain, and shall forfeit the place we now seem to have secured. The president might, if he would, prevent all this. He might, if he would, have the whole nation at his back. To that end, however, it would be required to know if his administration meant to look for support to its working men, or, on the other hand, to the bankers of Wall and State Streets, the capitalists of Boston and Lowell, Liverpool, and Manchester, all of whom are now so well represented by Mercers, Wells, and Atkinson, the Springfield Walker, and other members of the League, that derives its chief support from contributions of British and other foreign gold. War now exists between British capitalists and American working men farmers, miners, and merchants. It is a war that can give no end other than that of final and utter ruin to one or the other. On which side does the administration propose to fight? For one, I do not pretend even to guess at the answer that may be here given, nor do I know of anyone who does. Every hour that such answer is delayed gives strength to that democratic British Free Trade Party whose advent to power seems now so near at hand. Cut boldly, said the Sibyl to the hesitating Roman king. Let the administration now take the same advice. Let it cut boldly, and on the American side, and all may yet be saved. Will this be done? I fear not. So where am I here? So in February of 1869, thanks to the leadership of Carey, alongside his allies Thaddeus Stevens and William Kelly, they managed to get the Contraction Act repealed, which is a good victory. But as becomes a pattern in Kerry's fight, you get a victory followed by a slightly larger defeat, where March 1869, President Grant puts forward the Public Credit Act, where debts would now once again have to be paid in gold. Later on, the act would be modified in 1871 after issuing 1.8 billion in 10, 15, and 30-year bonds payable in specie, which just means gold bullion, like gold coins. Yeah, and by 1861, $66 million of gold per year would be getting siphoned off to London from the United States. Oh, sorry, I lost my place in my notes. Right. And so in the 10 years that followed, Carey and his allies would fight really hard, attempt after attempt made to defend Lincoln's revolution through creation of Greenback Labor Party, many, many more open letters and political maneuvers, maintaining a Republican majority in the House. But over time, most, if not all, of these efforts would over time fail, thanks to the weak will of many of those Republicans and the remnant of British loyalists still operating within the U.S. And monumental his efforts might have been, he was mostly only able to slow the dismemberment of Lincoln's revolution, not to take away from how inspiring his fight was. But after his death in 1879, there was no real leader to pick up his torch, and his allies in government were reduced to a minority of Republicans. And by 1880, the Wall Street Confederate faction, embedded deeply within the government, didn't have a whole lot left there to resist them. And by 1901, Lincoln and Carey's policies wouldn't really find another national voice for another 30 years, as most of Carey's allies were cycled out and gone by that time. And I don't want to leave things on a terribly sour note as such. So I threw this quote in here because I think it speaks to the spirit of the fight that everybody who's in it is trying to uphold, even amongst nihilistic moments where things feel a little bit hopeless. So read it here real quick. I know that the great volcano at Washington, aroused and directed by the evil spirit that reigns there, is belching forth the lava of political corruption in a current broad and deep, which is sweeping with frightful velocity over the whole length and breadth of the land, bidding fair to leave unscathed no green spot or living thing, while on its bosom are riding like demons on the wave of hell the imps of that evil spirit, and fiendishly taunting all those who dare resist its destroying course with the hopelessness of their efforts. And knowing this, I cannot deny that all may be swept away. Broken by it, I too may be. Bow to it, I never will. The probability that we may fall in the struggle ought not deter us from the support of a cause that we believe to be just. It shall not deter me. And that speaks largely to what I want everybody watching to take away from this presentation. I know it's easy looking at history to get nihilistic and feel like, in spite of fantastic, phenomenal efforts, the oligarchical class makes more and more incremental progress as time goes on, pushing back whatever we do further and further, where we don't really make big jumps in the opposite direction. But the cool thing is, if you're sitting in a nihilistic place thinking about history, the cool thing about it is you're still alive to be thinking about history, which means you still have the potential to enact change around you. What matters more than all of the great people that I've talked about in the presentation, Abraham Lincoln, Frederick Douglass, Henry Carey, and all their allies, is all the people it took to support and hold them up, all of the plebs, all the people that it took to vote for them and with them, and help expand their movement. None of them could do it alone. And so you have an important part to play no matter how bad things seem to get. If you've got breath left in you, then you've got fight left in you. Um, and so I've got one last silly little quote that kind of captures the spirit of that conclusion, which my computer's not, there we go. Which is a little Lord of the Rings quote. A lot of people who know me and my family, we're big fans. So I'll just read this up and wrap it up. Saruman believes that it is only great power that can hold evil in check, but that is not what I have found. I have found that it is the small things, everyday deeds of ordinary folk that keeps the darkness at bay, simple acts of kindness and love. And that's it.
That's excellent. Only in a Holmes family presentation will it lawfully end with Gandalf. That's great.
This is the way.
That is the way. Cool. Well, that was really, really great, Kyle. Thank you very much for sharing these discoveries, these insights. Yeah, and I think that point, the subjective point, is super important, considering the fact that if the oligarchy really was all powerful and had their way, we'd all be dead many times over. And the very fact we are here in the first place is evidence that there is a higher power of natural law that great people have risen to the occasion to defend and act upon that has thwarted that intention by said oligarchy time and time again. And I think your presentation really just showcased a wonderful, pregnant moment in history. Very good. Um, there's a few people lined up in the queue right now to pose a thought, share a question. And the first person I saw who got in there was Bruce de Torres. So it's all yours, Bruce.
Thank you very much. Kyle, I thank you for your heart and soul and the work you put into creating what you just shared with us. I've been reading. Lincoln was one of my first heroes starting, in first grade, and I became a daily reader of books in the first grade. And Lincoln really is an uncle to me, really. So here's some of the notes I took, which you sound more than well aware of, but this is for those beyond those assembled here. I've been telling people my whole life, read Lincoln in order to get smarter. If you want to get smarter, just read Lincoln, read his writings, read about his life, and try to just see how his mind worked. It's just thrilling and inspiring for many reasons, not least of which is that he came from the woods, barefoot, and doing manual labor. And to appreciate what he did during the war, particularly, he might agree that it was like playing chess when he had a million pieces, and his opponents and adversaries had a million pieces. Imagine that kind of chess game where you have to evaluate situations and defend the weaknesses and craft a decent aggressive move, and devising a good first step that could be developed into some huge new endeavor leading to a huge new reality, and developing the persuasive skills to bring people along with that. Often he would be very slow to analyze a situation and make a decision, but when he did, he rarely retreated. His modus operandi was to not back up an inch from making a well-planted move. That said, of course, he would pivot, stop, abandon, retreat in an initiative when he saw it wasn't working. It caused a disaster. It was an epic failure. He was only human. He was not omniscient. And then, just as a contribution to what you have so generously given us here, it's steering people to the work of Anton Chaikin, an author and historian, especially his book, Who We Are. Volume 1 has been out for a couple of years. Volume 2 is coming within 3 or 4 weeks, I understand. And it is a massively brilliant explication of the American system versus the British system, this precise history that you have so generously, Kyle, shared with us. People can find and follow his work at antonchaitkin.substack.com, ANTONCHAITKIN .substack.com. And finally, before I will devise a question for you, Kyle, um, reflecting on your appreciation of Frederick Douglass, that last quote that ended up with the shadows of these bad things dissipating in the revelation of infinite light, I experienced listening to your, this was like Christmas for me to praise Lincoln and the American system, to hear this, Kyle. I really felt part of my frustration with being a human being, I imagine might be, at least this gives me solace, is the fact that all that exists at its core is infinite love, consciousness, and possibilities, taking expression as each and everything we ever experience, including ourselves. And that's why it is so frustrating, maybe for me and others, to be this constricted, constrained human being with only my five senses and my biological needs and problems, and having a subconscious sense of my infinite capacity. And it is unleashed by heroic people like Lincoln and Douglas, and you with the presentation you created, by getting into action and daring to believe that love creates and fear destroys, and to do the loving and courageous things despite any and all opposition, including our own doubts and fears. Kyle, I'd love your response to anything I just said.
Yeah, you're what you summed up at the end there. I couldn't agree more. Why have enemies when you can have friends? That last quote from Frederick Douglass, I think, captures that quite well. Um, you know, Especially today, you see how many people have been wronged by this oligarchical system. But I think that it's for us to be willing to hold the open hand and invite people who don't necessarily share our views in. Um, we have to be the better people. And if we fail to do that, then we just play into the same hate you, hate me, back and forth volatile system, and nothing gets done. In my household, we're big proponents of Ian McGilchrist's work. If you've seen any of our conversations around that, with talking about the dynamics between our right and left hemispheres, and what you talked about with that open capacity for love and potential, it really speaks to the traits of the right hemisphere. Which, if you do decide to open up McGilchrist's tome, you'll see that throughout history, there's a running pattern where the best of us, the best of what we are, expresses itself through the traits that you find more in the right hemisphere. And you'll see a lot of traits of the oligarchy class personified by more left hemisphere traits. Not to do away with half of what's in our head. It's an important thing. None of us really gets anything done without it. But yeah, I share your sentiment. It's we're capable of beautiful things.
I'm inferring that you publish and post things that you want the public to find and see. Please drop in the chat at any convenient time where one might find more about you, Kyle. I'm discovering you for the first time here today. Thank you.
That was my first presentation.
And you seem a little frozen on the screen there, Kyle. Testing one,
Am I?
2, 3. Unless I froze.
No,
Anybody else
Kyle's good
confirm? Am I
on
good?
our side.
Okay.
It's all good. Yeah, you're fine, Kyle. I think Bruce
Okay.
yeah, glitched out. It's all good.
Oh, I see him moving again.
All right, cool. Jerry has a question.
Okay, thanks, Matt. And thanks, Kyle. That was very good. Loved your presentation because it's so appropriate for today. I think a lot of people are looking at Trump and what he's going to do. And this look at Lincoln, really sets it in perspective. But I just wanted to ask you a question. I mean, even when you were talking about Dr. Gilchrist, um, some of the work I had done earlier on Lincoln was there's a story, I think Anton Chaikin talks about it, where in some of Lincoln's cabinet meetings and they're talking about the war and it's serious, and Lincoln would go, "Oh, enough of this. Let's read Shakespeare." And they would read a play from Shakespeare. Or Lincoln would just start reciting some of Robert Burns's poetry because he knew a lot of it by heart. And I looked at that aspect of Lincoln, but I just wondering, have you ever looked at the artistic side of Lincoln and the strength it gave him to do what he had to do?
No, no, I didn't. I didn't know that he would do that with his speeches, but it sounds really cool. Preparing for the presentation, I looked at a couple of books, uh, kind of like life story type stuff of Lincoln. There's tons of them out there, but they were like, you know, together the ones I was looking at were like 250 hours worth of audio listening, and I was already trying to use Matthew's work and just economic, historical, documents and whatnot. So no, I didn't I didn't know that. I didn't dive into Lincoln's cultural influences that much. That's really cool.
Yeah, that's great that you just brought that up, Jerry, because I feel like that's a whole class that we've never seen treated properly or at least satisfyingly. So yeah, mental note or challenge out there to anybody with the passion to tackle this. Lincoln's cultural influences, yeah, and Robbie Burns and Shakespeare on Person of Lincoln. That would be great. Um, Mike Holmes just made a point to anybody listening who wants to see more of Kyle's contributions. Check out the at symbol home with Holmes on Substack. Right. So that's something we'll put in the description box under this video when it goes up onto YouTube and Rumble and all those other things. So people can subscribe to the Holmes Family Substack, and Kyle is a prominent featured speaker on that channel. Uwe has a question. Uwe.
Yeah, thank you, Kyle, for a wonderful presentation. I have a question due to my ignorance. You mentioned that the Northern Confederacy was a thing when the the struggles were going on against the British from the south. No, against defender of the British coming in from the south. Can you elaborate on this a bit more, because I wasn't really aware of that.
Right. How do I form it? So, Canada, like I said in the presentation, hadn't had its independence yet. We pretend like it has it today, but if you do some digging, you'll see that we're still pretty much completely in hands of British influence. But at the time, they were quite overtly just a complete extension. And so all the same supports that you got for the Confederate South were being coordinated through and up and in Canada to help uphold the Confederacy. And then that there was a brief section I pulled from Matthew's book. He can go way further than I can from just ability of recall, explaining. But the circumstance where the Union captured a few Confederate agents on their way to London, because they were coordinating in London quite a bit, almost sparked an attack from that 10,000 British soldiers who were also coordinating with Napoleon III's French army, who wanted to expand and take over some of the unsettled territory of Canada, because Canada in this time is mostly Quebec and Ontario territory. So further west isn't as settled yet, and so the British Empire convinced the French to help, and in return they would essentially receive more territory. Yeah, if Matthew wants to chip in some deeper stuff because he's much better at this than I am.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I could say a word on that, but just to be super clear, because my screen, I have got a shoddy internet connection here. It did freeze a little bit while Uwe was talking. So Uwe, could you just just pose your question again one more time?
Yes, so the issue of the Northern Confederacy is something which hadn't been too much on my mind. I mean, I know that this that Canada was under British influence, but to what extent was it really a project to have this Northern Confederacy in addition to the Southern Confederacy?
Yes. Yeah, what a lot of the best research that I found on this comes from actually Gerald Therrien and Anton Chaikin. Jerry, who's here actually on the call live. And I would just say both of their works were vital in me putting together the Clash of the Two Americas, and especially Volume One. And so Jerry actually might want to chime in on this, but I would say that it was absolutely vital and always present from the very first moments after the British signed the Treaty of Paris in 1881 or 1883 that put an end to officially to the American Revolution. And the idea was put into motion very early on to subvert the USA by economic intrigue, subversion, and dissolution, which Aaron Burr was assigned to be the sort of key figure, which took motion really in the 1790s. I think 1798 was the first attempt. 1800 it was attempted again. 1804 it was attempted again. 1807 it was attempted again. 1814 it was attempted again to use this division between slave and free states as a way to carve up the U.S., break it apart, and create a slave power of the South and a nominally free but actually pro free trade, thus slavery system that would be pro British of the North. And that was what culminated in 1861, as Kyle went through very nicely. Jerry, I don't know if there's anything you want to toss in there that I might be missing.
Before you answer, Jerry, maybe I can expand my question. So, was it that the northern part of the Union would have been the Northern Confederacy, or was there a Canadian part of this Northern Confederacy project?
Oh, yeah.
That's what I really don't understand.
Yeah, it was basically to make the northern free states become integrated into the British control mechanism of the British colonies that were then Canada, the upper British colonies that were under the control of the Governor General and the monarchy, and basically to rewrite the Constitution in adapting to the British system, as far as I understand it. Again, Jerry, would that be accurate, or would you add more flavor to that?
Yeah, I think that's correct in that you had certain people in the United States who wished to see Canada become part of the Union. But the British operation was to see the northern states separate from the Union and become part of Canada. Mm-hmm. So it looks like, oh yeah, they're both for Canada and the northern states joining together, but in principle, there's two very different operations afoot. And I think when Matt and I discovered that, it really opened up a lot of discoveries around the Aaron Burr project to do that. And also you saw that in leading up to the Civil War, where you had the radical abolitionists in the North wished for the northern states to separate from the Union and to join with Canada into this crazy British North America. But it was the idea, the British objective was to split the Union. And so they fermented this idea of, the North saying, look at the South, they have slavery, this is bad, we need to separate from them. It sounds good, but it serves the British Empire's policy of splitting the United States in two. So a lot of this was run out of Canada, where they said, oh, yeah, Canada and the northern states, we're alike, we should get together. But their idea was for the northern states to leave the Union and become part of Canada, whereas there were a lot of Republicans in the northern states who wanted Canada to join the Union and become part of the United States, which would have been good. And it still would be good, but that's a whole other story. But I just wanted to add that part.
Thank you, Jerry Kickat. That's fantastic. And on that note, anybody who wants to read Jerry's books, he's got three published. Fourth one's coming out very soon. The Holmes family actually played a role in formatting Jerry's third book too, so you'll get a little taste of the Holmes family there if you pick up volume 3. Marty also got to make a big apology. Marty actually did the thing I said that I had forgotten has already been done, which was the class on Lincoln and Lincoln's relationship to Shakespeare. And that is also in the chat box. I added it, Marty added it. So people this week, take the time, listen to Marty's class on Lincoln and Shakespeare. Fantastic presentation. So apologies, Marty. It was, yeah, my mind just completely, my recall's not always as sharp as I want it to be. So
happens to be all the time, man.
Thank you, man. Marty, did you want to share? What did you think of the class today? Did you have any thoughts? I know you always have thoughts to share.
Well, I always have thoughts, but first, thank you, Kyle. That was wonderful, and it was pitch perfect. And Matt's just been apologizing for forgetting when he virtually never does, and I forget all the time. And I should have remembered more that I'd learned from you guys on Kerry. And of course, I haven't. I have a theory that very often when any of us bring up crucial points and crucial people like Kerry, we have been conditioned subtly all our lives, not by conscious brainwashers, but just by the whole atmosphere of the society around us that it takes for granted, and that influences us too. We cannot be reminded of people like Kerry and his achievements and his analysis and people like Douglas enough, because what they really said and taught, like W.E.B. Du Bois, is so contrary to what we subconsciously have taken for granted all our lives. And I think this is a huge issue. I mean, one point I would like, a couple of points I would like to add. First of all, and actually, this is a new pitch, Matt, and you know throw them at you relentlessly and endlessly, so I apologize. But I'd suggest doing a piece very specifically on the Hitler of the 19th century, the greatest draper of the world of the 19th century, Lord Palmerston, British Foreign Secretary and Prime Minister for 35 years, from the 1830s to his death in 1865. The list of his war crimes and achievements in war crimes is extraordinary. He destroyed Chinese civilization in the 2 Opium Wars. He killed 1 million Russians in the Crimean War, which was an act of open aggression, again to try and enslave Ukraine and break up Russia. In 1854-55, the Crimean War is deeply misunderstood for that reason to this day. And he uses the excuse of the Indian Mutiny, as they call it in Britain, which did initially involve horrific war crimes in which hundreds of English men, women, and children were horrifically killed in atrocities in India in 1857. But more than 1 million Indians were killed. 1 million Indians were killed in response, which you never see in any British historiography at all. And the Mughal Empire was destroyed. And you have this extraordinary case for Britain with France as its tamed ally and lapdog, Tonto to the Lone Ranger, the same role the British publicly give themselves to America today, though as we all know, a lot of the direction actually, Tonto is actually riding the Lone Ranger and telling it what to do most of the time. We see this in Ukraine again now. But Palmerston is involved in all of this. And also in the preempting of democracy, the initial efforts to destroy democracy in Mexico, which Lincoln and Grant foil in their time. But after Palmerston's death, Lord Salisbury and others achieve with horrific success under Porfirio Diaz, the Stalin of the Western Hemisphere, the great killer of the Western
Hold up,
Hemisphere.
hold up, Marty. I'm just thinking to
Oh,
myself
sorry.
here. Do I have you down to give a lecture next week?
I
Is
think
that
you
is
do
that
actually, or the 23rd, if I remember correctly, Matt,
all right?
which will be
Well, how
two
about
weeks from
this?
now, I think.
Okay, well, how about this? You want to just do this class? Is that too short, like last minute? Can
No,
you just
no,
do?
no. I mean, as you know,
Okay.
with me, the problem was always getting me to shut up rather than getting me to start. And look, Kyle, bless you, you understand immediately. But when I look at the faces of Monty and Jerry, they know me too well. Like old friends do. That's exactly right. But no, I think that's a wonderful
All right.
idea.
So let's do that. All right. So that was the
Oh,
teaser. That was the
absolutely.
teaser
But in
for
the case
Marty's
of
next class
Shakespeare, the
in
one
two
thing
weeks.
I'll add is
Yeah.
there are two or three key influences on his life, and one is the King James Bible, and the second is Shakespeare. And the points that Bruce made before, I think, is central too. Here is this genius who leaves school at 12 or 16, who is a literal log cabinist, who is functionally illiterate till what, at least age 6 or age 8. And simply from the very basic texts of Western civilization, the Bible and Shakespeare, and of course I maintain Shakespeare was Marlowe all along, and Marlowe as a courtier is in the court of Elizabeth I. So Lincoln is learning how kings and presidents and rulers and warlords operate from a man who was actually in the belly of the beast, who was always in the room where it happened, as another genius, Lin-Manuel Miranda, says in his wonderful rap musical. Hamilton, by the way, you yourself or Cynthia, or Jerry would be perfect for it, of course. But someone shouldn't one of us do something on Lin-Manuel Miranda and Hamilton and the contributions and the lessons we learned from that? Well,
Meh,
think
we'll see.
because
Yeah.
he
Okay.
does give Hamilton his due. I know the cultural framework is not pleasing to classicists like yourself who are serious about culture, but we have three kids. And they learned nothing and showed no interest in all their lives whatsoever in the American Revolution and its principles. And now they're all passionate about it. And where did
Mm.
they learn their passion from? And they're articulate about it. They learned it all from the lyrics of Hamilton, which do not dumb down the issues and do not oversimplify or mislead the issues. They get the issues right, and they have enlightened an entire generation whose minds have been closed to great classical 19th century civilization, but the lessons of 19th century civilization, 18th century civilization, still come creeping in, even in new forms. It's like a benign version of shape shifting. I'm sorry, I'm going all over the place as usual. Let me stop there. But thank you. And yes, very happy to switch it to Palmerston in a couple of weeks. You're on.
Cool. Awesome. All right. Well, whatever revs people's engines to get to do the deeper work is okay. Um, Monty, and thank you, Marty. Thank you for being so flexible and yeah, you sold us all on the Palmerston.
Yes.
Uh,
Oh, Matt, sorry.
this felt
One
very
last
very
point.
effective. Yes, sir.
This, a
Oh
wonderful
yeah.
new book by Nigel Hamilton, a wonderful
Oh,
biographer,
okay.
comparing Lincoln and Davis.
Okay. Huh.
You could
Interesting.
also call it Becoming Lincoln, because his thesis is that Davis ran rings around Lincoln for the first couple of years of the Civil War because Lincoln was too civilized and too cautious. Very much the same criticisms that Kyle rightly points out, that others have pointed out, that Douglas made of Lincoln. And Hamilton agrees with this. But
Mm,
once Lincoln goes to the moral dimension and the anti slavery dimension and the grand strategic political dimension with the Emancipation Declaration, Hamilton maintains that that's when the war was won and that's when the Confederacy was doomed. Because, of course, the Confederacy, by its nature, was evil and racist and
yeah.
limited and Nazi. And
Yeah.
once
Right.
Lincoln fully matured to translate that, all of a sudden everything changes. And he dumps all the loser generals and appeasers who have held him back for so long.
Cool. All right. Nope. Awesome. Thank you,
But
man.
again, Kyle, thank you. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
Uh, Also, Bruce made the point in the chat box that Anton's new book can be found and will be found at Anton's Substack. So that's also going to be in the description box as that work is just so vital to all of the content that we've been listening to today. Um, Monty, go for it.
Yeah, thank you so much. Much appreciate. Most inspirational, and you have my head spinning again. So I'll try to be coherent. Uh, I was struck yesterday. I was on a Zoom call with Peter Duke, who's also collaborated with Matthew Arrett and also an associate of another friend of mine, George Webb. And in that part of the presentation on a Zoom call was on his latest work called Jesus as the Logos. He put it out March 2nd on Substack. And I made the comment that this seemed to intersect very much with Matthew's work on revenge of the mystery cults, on going back to the time of Babylon and even before, how they've been used to basically usurp the idea of man made in the image and likeness of God, or the Logos, and the people that represented that. Through various things, assassinations, Operation Phoenix, trying to justify this, saying that you can burn down the village to save it, and so forth. And related to your presentation today, I'm just struck by how it is that other people in history, such as Shakespeare, Lincoln, and so forth, in other words, human beings that actually represented something of the word or the Logos, have been besmirched or assassinated or done away with, such as Lincoln and that plot to crucify him, essentially, or murder him. And I'm just looking at the pattern here, whereas Lincoln resurrected this idea of man made in the image and likeness of God through the Republican Party. And of course, he was assassinated and things happened, but then FDR and JFK resurrected this idea in the Democratic Party. And that was pretty well crucified, in my view, with Lyndon Baines Johnson and the escalation in the war in Vietnam and all the MK Ultra things that transpired since that time. You know, like weird things inside Laurel Canyon, where they had a whole program to kill any idea and with the hippie dream. And now it appears, and then you had Clinton and Obama and Biden doubling down with more mongering, and the whole culture of the Democratic Party, which was resurrected under that classical liberal tradition, was killed. And now it appears we once again have an opportunity to resurrect it once again within the Republican Party. And I would point in particular to the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, making the comment that the hegemonic unipolar world is finished and the multipolar world is the new reality. It doesn't mean they're going to follow through on that or we won that, but it seems like there's an opportunity to resurrect that idea of man made in the image and likeness of the Logos or God, that could once have become a reality. So just my thoughts, and your comment would be welcome.
Yeah. Yeah, you point to that important pattern all throughout history. I got to cite Ian McGilchrist's book again, because when he breaks down the cycles of history from the perspective of looking at your brain, you see that a very easy to see pendulum swing back and forth throughout history. You know, you have it happen when Rome collapses. You have it happen around the Renaissance. It happens when England gets taken over, and it's happening again. We see ourselves in what looks like another, what he would call a largely left hemisphere swing towards this. He doesn't frame it in terms of understanding an oligarchy. He doesn't frame it that way. He more so has discovered a mechanism that, you know, people like us can apply to the world and use it to understand what the people doing these kinds of things are actually like. But what you said about an opportunity to swing it back the other direction, I think we always have that opportunity, because when you understand the brain, you understand that in every individual, even, you know, pretty horrible people. There's an opportunity to ping, to connect with the other side of your mind that that allows for the potential rather than pursuit of power. I'm not necessarily crazily optimistic about the current Trump administration, but what I am very optimistic about is it's less of a victory for say Trump and his allies, and more so a victory for the people who rallied together. That's it, right? Great people in history need people to support them. Nobody ever did it alone, and I think that especially since COVID, so many people have met each other that up until then seemed to have no real business being associated and friends with one another, and now they have this crazy common ground. And there's been an upswell of support. And while there's obviously attempts to subvert and hijack that mindset and get more people infighting, you have all sorts of little factions in your freedom communities not quite on the same page, but I still see so much momentum that, yeah, I think the pendulum can swing back the other way. But, you know, it requires a great deal of effort, and you have to stay engaged. You can't disengage. You can't back off. You got to keep it in, lock in, get it done.
Yeah, well said.
Thank you once
And
more.
yeah, and I think that that's what you did in today's presentation. Really, I think it's so necessary because of the very fact that it's such a cloudy, foggy, confused representation of the American system with a lot of the wrong intentions and power structures vying to influence this thing and manipulate a lot of good people towards actions that are ultimately being shaped by some very toxic bad ideas. And then there's good people who are trying their best to make sense of what allowed America to exist in the first place and to survive these impossible challenges over time. And they need clarification about what this American system was, concrete case studies of how it worked, when it failed, when it was sabotaged. And that lack of clarity can be really existentially fatal for patriots who don't take the time to really hone their minds to understand this thing. So I think you did a great job just sharing your work. This study that you put into this is of just immense value. I'm curious, in the course of the amount of the tons of reading you've done in this chapter of our history, were there any field of inquiry that you felt the need to explore as another chapter? You know, in the course of doing these research, these deep dives, a bunch of questions pop up along the way. Is there anything that you're thinking about your course of action going in the next field of maybe another moment in history or another part of the either American system or something else?
Um, I'd like more. I think I'd like more understanding of Lincoln's life, and probably Carey too. I thought they were both really inspiring. The articles that you sent me from the LaRouche stuff talking about Carey was really fantastic. I wanted to include more because it was quite good. I brushed over it pretty quickly, but yeah, a deep dive maybe further into Carey's efforts. It'd be cool to see some more information on that.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Yeah,
Because I mean, like I said, like for the 14 years after Lincoln died, he pushes back till his deathbed and doesn't slow down or stop at any point, right? So
yeah, absolutely. The presence of Carey's strategic mind around the world is just mind-boggling. How he's like almost like a Ben Franklin Leibniz
yeah,
type, where his mind is just working on so many levels at the same time, making flanks with people in Asia and Russia and South America all the time. And every time he loses a little battle, he's planned like 5 backup plans to like spring to action. So
Yes.
yeah, I'd love to see
yeah.
how a mind like that came into being and was really
Yeah,
cultivated. That'd be
there's
cool.
one little. It's like a really funny little quote from one of the articles, which I just found funny. Where They said that just the very mention of Henry C. Carey's name in a group of British aristocrats was enough to just like dispel them like rats scurrying away.
Right on, man.
Oh man, I think that'd be wonderful. Myron, I saw you wrote a question or you shared a thought. If you'd like to say it aloud, I didn't have time to read it, Myron. So feel free to take yourself off mute and share it if you'd like. Are you there, Myron? Well, here, I guess Myron might be having some issues with the unmute function. I'll just read it. Seems positive. Myron says, always retain your highest ideals and do not abandon them. All truly good ideas are reviving at such a moment, and people are hungry and sick of the double talk of the corrupt status quo. Equally important is that the status quo, I'm losing it, status quo is losing and failing all over the world. They are employing every dirty trick that they can think of to quell resistance and retain control. I don't want to be in their shoes right now. Turning, losing it. Nope. My little, there it is. Turning points and tipping points are in the offing, so to speak. So do not give up on your ideals. Keep them and pursue them, no matter what the distortion machine tries to make them appear to be. All right, Myron, that was very cool. Thank you for sharing that. Kyle, this was great, dude. Really, really good job. I'm very, very happy with this. And this is going to go up online, like I said, with a lot of links for people to do follow-up research, including Martin Seif's class on Lincoln and Shakespeare. And thank you, everybody, for sharing today. I don't remember what next week's class is going to be, but it'll be great. And I hope to see everybody there next week.
Right on.